So I thought it was a chance to combine my background as a journalist and my concerns as a citizen and husband and father with what I did for a living. I thought of Green Lantern as the best cop who ever lived. So we needed somebody to represent the more anarchistic point of view.
That viewpoint came in the form of Green Arrow. O'Neill teamed up with Adams, and together they changed the character forever.
It was decided to add him into Green Lantern. But they didn't just add him in. They turned him into an anti-character. They turned him into a real human being.
It made him a much more interesting, unique character that wasn't a Batman knockoff.
Green Lantern in particular was very much a straight arrow, kind of a super cop type character.
You really had the right and left opinions going on there, and they were able to argue out social positions.
He was the balance to the squeaky clean heroes that the rest of the DC universe pretty much was.
It was Green Arrow's job to say, hey, knock, knock. You may think that's right, but you have to think about it just a little bit more. Maybe it's not.
He just goes into these rants, and he's always getting into fights with everybody about, social and political issues.
The Green Team pairing was a natural fit, and they applied their unique perspectives on the social and political issues of the time.
Oliver Queen didn't just fight against the Joker and the Penguin. He fought against racism. He fought against homelessness. He fought against political corruption. I mean, those are the battles that I want to fight.
I didn't plan on giving any solutions to these problems. I was not and am not that smart. I did think there was some value in making people aware of it.
We kind of agreed among ourselves that we're not in a position to solve these problems, but to discuss them.
Green Arrow dealt with the first drug abuse and teen drug abuse storyline in the 70s when his kid sidekick Speedy Roy wound up being a heroin junkie. And so they didn't really tackle stuff like that in the comics up until that point.
I got a letter from a drug addict, you're not going to believe this, who said he stopped doing drugs because of that comic book. I mean, what do you say? It's incredible.
The idea that a comic book came out that could deal with those issues, that could show someone, a superhero dealing with racism or drug use or problems like that, blew people's minds back then.
It's not just about saving somebody who's in a burning building, but trying to find and save the people who might be slowly dying because of hunger. That's exciting.
And it was different, and it really was jostling.
We knew we were pushing the envelope. I mean, that was the idea of comic books as a respectable medium was pretty far out in those days.
I have to give Denny credit for changing the face of the comic book business. We now talk about that stuff all the time. If people say, well, relevant Green Lantern and Green Arrow wasn't that important, we do that all the time. We say, not before Green Lantern and Green Arrow you didn't.
That whole era of what Denny O'Neill was doing with Neil Adams was what defined the character for generations to come. And nobody can really surpass that to me in my mind.
The Green Lantern, Green Arrow comics were so popular that by the early 80s, Oliver Queen received his own title for the first time, a mini-series written by Mike Barr.
Mike Barr addressed the question of, what if you give him his money back? Does that change the mission? So he gave him, temporarily gave him millions of dollars, gave him his fortune back. The situation became, I can't really solve these problems with money. I'm doing the right thing by really taking it to the streets and by putting myself out there and not just throwing money around.
The unstable atmosphere of the mid-'80s brought a shift to comic books in both content and style. In response to the overwhelming success of Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns and Alan Moore's Watchmen, DC turned to writer-artist Mike Grell to update Oliver Queen in the miniseries The Longbow Hunters,
which was a much grittier, more adult, more sort of urban hunter take on the character and having very little to do with the superhero aspect of it. And it was a phenomenal success.
He changed his look to a hood. He became sort of like a sword and sorcery character, kind of an urban hunter.
He's usually a little left of center, but if you look at the Mike Grell run, he started leaning a little more right of center.
Grell did away with things like the boxing glove arrow and all the trick arrows and whatnot, and really kind of boiled the character down to his bare essentials in terms of archery.
Even though it's beautiful and I love it, I think Longbow Hunters is, a really important work. Grell's run is the darkest superhero run maybe ever in anything.
The Longbow Hunters led to the first regular monthly Green Arrow series. Grell continued for several years before turning the creative reins over to Chuck Dixon and Kelly Puckett.
Chuck is all about the street-level urban hunter guy. Kelly Puckett's Green Arrow was just going out there and doing the job.
By the mid-90s, interest in Green Arrow had waned, and his series was dipping in sales. In issue number 101, the Archer took his final bow.
The idea was, why don't we just take him off stage for a couple of years? But we still need a Green Arrow. We still want there to be somebody like that in the DC Universe.
That someone was none other than Oliver's long-lost son, Connor Hawke, who became the new Green Arrow.
Connor took over the book, and Connor took over the feature for a few years. And it was very successful. I mean, Connor really made a mark for himself as the new Green Arrow. But that Oliver Queen role of the knee-jerk liberal activist, political activist, that's not something that Connor filled. And so there was just as writers started to miss Oliver a little bit more and started to see that we kind of wish we had him around, there was a movement to bring him back.
People don't realize Ollie was dead. He was gone. He'd been gone for a number of years, not just a 6-month period where they were going to bring him back quickly.
The new millennium saw the resurrection of Oliver Queen at the hands of acclaimed filmmaker Kevin Smith and artist Phil Hester.
I didn't really have grander aspirations than just bringing back the Oliver Queen that everybody knew and loved. And there are huge Connor fans out there in the world, but, Green Arrow is Oliver Queen.
Our first poster for the series was Welcome to the Resurrection, because he was coming back.
Kevin Smith's story made Green Arrow the #1 selling title at DC Comics. To follow up on that success, DC hired best-selling novelist Brad Meltzer. Oliver's resurrection gave him a new lease on life and a new perspective on what mattered to him most, his family.
Green Arrow felt more like a father to me in Brad's arc than he ever had been before.
He's a father to his own child. He's a father figure to Roy. He's a husband to Dinah. And he's a bastard to all of them.
With his son Connor, an ex-sidekick Roy, an ex-girlfriend the Black Canary, and a new ward, Mia Dearden, a former teen prostitute, the Green Arrow had his hands full with complex relationships.
He's also very protective. He's in his relationship with Mia and Connor. You don't want to mess with him. You don't want to get between him and his kids because he will take you out.